And now, New Galaxy Enterprises proudly presents Threshold Radio.
This is Johnny Blue Star. Welcome to Threshold, a global media event. Is the universe just a random dance of atoms, or is it a manifestation of a supremely intelligent architect? Can its purpose, or our purpose here on Earth, be adequately assessed? Can we commune with it, know its intentions, cooperate with its direction? Here, we define threshold as a gateway state of awareness, allowing mankind to cross into a place of real cognition. Threshold allows us to approach questions of higher reality through the door of experience, rather than mere belief. Welcome to Threshold, where we tear away the veil from commercial media, bringing our audience and participants into another realm of reality and enhanced communication.
Have you had a longing to create an original book, screenplay, or other media project, but neither had the time nor expertise to do it? I'm Johnny Blue Star, and I founded New Galaxy Enterprises to help ambitious, busy, but highly creative people fulfill their goals to create poignant media projects. If you need help to accomplish your goals, visit newgalaxyenterprises.com or contact me at johnnybluestar@gmail.com. Turn your vision into a dazzling media reality. Manifest your media dream today. Welcome to Threshold. I'm welcoming back one of my favorite guest hosts, Rod Tyler, who has always been a kind of individual watchdog when it comes to citizen and human rights throughout the world. Rod has also been a participant in shows that have a spiritual focus. If you're interested in our work together spiritually, go to threshold.com and look for an archived show called The Divine Presence. In this show, we shall be talking about a unique perspective in politics derived from our mutual experience and understanding of the divine presence, and applying it to the case of Donald Trump, whose recent delayed reactions to the incidents in Charlottesville have attracted a gigantic response from the media, Congress, and various leaders of the world. In other words, Trump is facing, for just delaying a condemnation of the Ku Klux Klan and the Nazis explicitly, he's facing a gigantic amount of outrage, even beyond the point where he did explicitly mention things. People who were dropping out of some of his advisory boards continue to drop out, and he's actually canceled some of them, which is kind of a shame. But this is the kind of reaction he got. And now, in trying to conform to our concept of a perfected presidency and a perfected Donald Trump, we're going to look at what he's doing and what could he do differently and think differently and possibly feel differently in order to be able to change what's going on in his presidency. Now, I have to say that in a lot of ways, Donald Trump is an extremely interesting person. I think he's very intelligent in certain ways, but his intelligence has been shaped by a lot of business experience and not really directly by being in government. And whereas people bring this up from time to time, I do think it's true. I mean, it's not, there are some things that he does that I think it's just because he's not practiced in thinking that way. But on a more important level, he has been doing certain things that are really dangerous to his own success. And a lot of that has to do with his thinking. Rod, can you imagine a Trump-perfected presidency?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I can. And I do believe that it's possible. We, the people, need to be able to send the president. We need to send him spiritual healing energies so he can start to govern in a more enlightened manner. I think that's very important. I don't think there's people that should want the president to fail, because when a president fails, it fails for everyone. And I do believe that it's possible, but it is on us, the people, to do our part. But it is so right when you say that most of Donald Trump's experiences in business do not necessarily prepare him for what he is facing now. The political world, it's a very difficult world. It's a different kind of animal. And it's a world for which Donald Trump was certainly not prepared for. And it certainly doesn't hurt if you have political experience. And if you don't have it, you should have at least spiritual experience So you can draw some lessons from there. And in this case, I see a very difficult situation for Donald Trump. He's surrounded by people who don't like him. He has a small cadre of supporters that do like him, but seem to dislike each other. There seems to be a lot of infighting in the White House. There's a lot of disarray in the executive branch at this moment. And that's not good for America. That's not good for everyone. And the events that just recently happened in Charlottesville, Virginia, I think they reignited many movements of the past and have shown the country that there's a great divide amongst certain groups of people. And the president had a duty to do the right thing. And I think he didn't. He had an opportunity, he didn't. And he's struggling with the issue. And I think that this is a great opportunity for us to discuss about what's going on at this time.
Well, I think there's I'm sorry. I think there's two problems. The first is that we're saying that he only had business experience, but it's not just the fact he was involved in business experience, but it's the mindset in which he was involved. And he brought that mindset straight into his campaign. And what he did was, if you follow that, Rod, and you probably have, he reversed a lot of his earlier opinions, like for single payer. He wanted a lot of things differently, and he changed. And it seems to me, now I'm not saying that he did this totally consciously. I'm not saying he didn't say to himself, this is what I really believe. But I think what he did is he decided on a certain base. And the base that he decided on, where he thought he could get a great big following, was basically a lot of white, uneducated men. And so he went to the point where he targeted a group of people who were hardworking people who wanted jobs, and this was the big thing that he's pushed all along. And at the same time, he wanted them to feel that they would be prosperous and he would protect them. But when he got into the presidency, he did a lot of things that didn't protect them. And a lot of those things they don't even realize. But in fact, although he's bringing jobs in, there's a lot of aspects of those jobs and the possibilities for their security that he's not bringing in. And he wasn't ever, I don't think he ever intended to bring it in. So what he did is he got a base of people who believed and trusted him, and he catered to some of their biases and prejudices and anger, and used that to move himself into a really good position. And he used a lot of strategic moves in order to, get the Electoral College votes. And he did a great job in that, and he won the election. But he's brought with him a sort of contradictory attitude. He's caught between wanting to keep his base and perfect his base, and the fact that he's actually hurting his base in different ways, and certainly hurting a great majority of other people in the country.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree. But his strategy, even though it worked for the past election, is a contradiction, because he ran one platform, his own platform, but within the GOP, which basically espouses exactly the opposite of what he was preaching during his campaign. A lot of things that he was talking about are in direct contradiction with the platform of the GOP. And I think if he had tried to run as an independent, he probably would have not made it very far.
He needed the GOP.
He needed the GOP, and I think he understood that very early on. But he did craft his message to appeal to that sector of the population, the people that are disenfranchised, the people who were left out of the new job market opportunities, right?
That's correct. And he also appealed to people who not only people who were sort of in that group, but also people who were somewhat knowledgeable of what Hillary Clinton was about, and was very much appealing to getting away from the established forces and clearing the swamp, draining the swamp. And they thought he would drain the swamp. And so they would vote for him, and some really intelligent people voted for him. But at the same time, he was still catering to a lot of people's hatred, anger, and fear.
Absolutely. I think that a lot of people, and you're referring to a lot of good people that used to vote Democrat, and they felt abandoned, by the ultra neoliberal policies of both the Democratic Party and the Republicans, because at the core they both support the same policies, right?
Well, I would put the word liberal in quotes, or maybe more neoliberal, and then I don't know if what you're saying is they're corporate controlled. They're controlled by perhaps insiders who are engaging in very unscrupulous things. And so, in other words, the globalist type of thing, right? Not the good globalist type of thing where we have a nice world order, but more or less a world order controlled by certain individuals and central banks, and where we're all kind of slaves of almost a socialist type of a state. And I'm talking about particularly the Democratic Party, but also the Republican Party establishment and it's a party that's largely based on supporting war and military development as opposed to helping the people.
Yeah, it's like when you say the globalists, I like to think that like these globalists are like the new plantation owners.
Yes.
The world is their plantation, but they now move to Wall Street, and other more quote unquote reputable areas of business. But it's basically the same concept,
And
make the world your slave, right? It
is it's a world controlled by financial interests that are tied very deeply to police and military interests and intelligence interests, so that you can maintain this kind of control. And here's a particularly interesting song from me, having come from this area. It's called The Palm Springs Lullaby, sung by Patricia Welch with music by Edgar Ahrens. I wrote the lyrics.
Escaping from the dawn, we flee to desert skies. The final dance is on, with no more alibis. As windmills madly spin, our dreams from lovesick sighs. That dancing shadows win a gleam from downcast eyes. Rippling through the desert, the wind cannot deride the golden strings and sweet refrains that Palm Springs lullaby. The fiercely burning stars now shine in jewel-tipped glass. We sip our wine and slowly dine, fearing night will pass. Dry winds quickly change palm fronds to magic wands. We sink into a golden spa and sigh beneath a sea of stars. Life's now so lovely and so strange in our desert Shangri-La.
This is Johnny Bluestar, CEO of New Galaxy Enterprises, a media content development company. Writing a novel can be an amazing, exhilarating adventure where you enter an inspired new world created by your own imagination. Like poetry, song, film, and playwriting, there is sometimes a strange sense that your words and ideas are coming from a new, undiscovered place in your own psyche, a presence much bigger than yourself, that perhaps has guided you to this point of creativity. We would be glad to help you create a compelling story emerging so poignantly from your own imagination. To learn more about New Galaxy, see samples of our work, or talk to us about your project, please go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com and fill out the contact form. Trump did not choose his base arbitrarily. I'm sure he made alliances carefully and picked a strategy that might help him win with the demographic he chose. The strategy was all about going to war with the globalists. Let's look at the other part of it now. The thing about Trump is he was aware of this stuff. He was aware of it and he talked about it. And the fact that he was aware of it and sort of used it in a way, like allying himself with Alex Jones as an example, where he was comporting himself as part of the resistance. And then when he got into office, he started to choose people that for his cabinet that didn't seem to be exactly part of the resistance. It's very complicated. He was caught in all these things. And I think what he has to do is really change a whole lot of his outlook. But he's learning. I think unlike other people who have been president, he is so much of a truly outsider, and I think he does have a sensitivity. People don't think of it. He's lacking. I saw a little report that he's lacking the empathy gene, but I actually think he has a little bit of that empathy gene, and I think he's repressed it because he's changed a lot of his so-called more conventional old-time liberal thoughts to a very, very high level, not high level, but very strong conservative views, including some of the alt-right. So he needs to change his point of view, which means only one thing. He needs to serve the people. He needs to stop thinking about his base and start thinking about America, because everything that he's doing to concentrate and focus on his base is stripping him of his power to serve America. Because a lot of his base doesn't want to have, single-payer health care. Whether or not it's good for people or not, they buy his story that, this kind of, competition is going to solve the problem and we can control the drug prices and so forth. But that's not really true, in my opinion. What do you think, Rod?
Well, it's just, let's see it from a very practical perspective. I think that Donald Trump thought that probably once he made it to the White House, that he'd be able to build alliances and that probably he'd be able to negotiate with the Democrats. But how can you pass legislation to Congress when you only have one political party that very tepidly supports you, right?
Yeah.
As we just witnessed the terrible healthcare reform effort, right? That ended up in defeat for the Republicans.
It was almost a comedy.
It was almost a comedy, and it had to be the vote that killed it was made by McCain.
Yes, the one person that he had to grievously insult by calling him something other than a hero because he was captured and tortured.
But that's kind of the thing. I mean, let's just go back talking about Donald Trump having that fiber, being empathic, but also being just a regular person. He's not a polished politician. It's like, I remember that exchange between, it was a Republican pollster, I don't remember his name, and him. And the Republican pollster was saying something, and something that with which Trump disagreed, that John McCain had said, right? But that argument had nothing to do with John McCain's career as a military person and as a POW, right? It had nothing to do with it. And I remember the pollster said to Trump, yeah, but John McCain, he's a war hero, right? It's like they were arguing about something, and he brings this, basically, it is
sort of a complimentary, the opposite of an ad hominem attack, a pro hominem point of view, but he must be right because he's a hero.
Exactly the opposite of ad hominem attack. It's like, but it's a fallacy, right? It's illogical, and that made Trump very angry, right? That made Trump angry. He got angry, and then he said what he said. So that's clearly just a person, right? It's like if you rub them the wrong way, probably they're going to react to that. And on top of that, I think there have been some things said before, and McCain was not very nice to Trump. Remember, a lot of people said very bad things about Trump, right?
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Tried to ridicule him, and
well, he was a birther for one thing.
Yeah, but there were a lot of people that what we would call mainstream Republicans. They were saying bad things about Trump, so he hit back, and he attacked a lot of people. It's part of a campaign, but somehow I think that probably, and this is what I believe, deep inside he thought that once he made it to the White House, that he'd be able to say, "Hey, it's all in the past. It's a campaign." Right?
Well, he did that with Hillary Clinton.
He did that with Hillary Clinton. I mean, I think that when you reach a certain level, and it's strange to say this, but I do believe that you need a certain level of maturity and political maturity. Understand that yes, you can fight over something. Yes, you can insult somebody. This is politics, and these are the way that nowadays, and this is not a recent phenomenon. In the past. And we know that politicians have insulted each other. And I'm going all the way back to the foundation of the country, right? They did not mince words, right? And but you have to understand that once the campaign is over, now it's time for compromise to be made and dialogue to get restarted, right? It gets put on pause during the campaign. It's a campaign. And but I thought that probably Donald Trump's calculation was, I'm going to make it there, and then I'm going to be able to talk to Democrats. You know, do you remember what the criticism was first? That he was a liberal from New York.
Yeah, and I think in terms of being an old-style liberal, he probably was closer to that than he wasn't really. I don't think exactly a globalist. He was different than that.
He was different. I thought that he felt that because he knew all those people, like Chuck Schumer and all those people, they knew a lot of people.
And he supported them. I mean, he supported Hillary Clinton, and he supported people like that. How Trump, during his campaign, strategically targeted a certain group of people. But we think that possibly, in his mind, he thought if he could get the presidency, he would be able to work fairly easily with the Democrats that he was associated with for so long, including the Clintons. But things got very bitter at the end with the Clintons, and when he made the final transition, he did try to forgive them or forgive her, but he left a certain trail of impressions about a lot of things because basically he tried to win the election by embarrassing and defaming people right and left. And so by the time he became president, he had that reputation and still maintained that point of view towards people using the same old tool, Twitter. And see, what I want to say, Rod, is that let's look at how he could have looked at things differently. Because actually, if he was trying to change things to become more liberal, he kind of did it a certain way. He took the most right-wing and in the new style, the most alt-right people involved that you could possibly be involved without being told you're outright, you're not necessarily a neo-Nazi, but you certainly are in the area of white supremacy and certain ethnic prejudices. He brought that into the presidency, and he actually tried to actualize that.
Oh yeah, he did. I think that he feels that that's part of his base.
And Trump perfected, could never, I think looking at the spiritual presence that we know, could never look at men and women and children that way in terms of their ethnicity. And it goes against the basic idea of all men being created equal in the Declaration. So there's a certain mindset that he has, like, I'm going to win by basically no matter what. I will hurt people. I will insult people. I will distort my true feelings and conform them to a certain base, and which I know which he realized that he'd have to maintain in order to maintain any kind of power at all. And so he would have to change his very basic attitude towards people in general, and not use the certain ethnic groups as and the fear that he was trying to generate in order to gain the support of this base.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree with that. But I do believe that, in a sense, I think the people that lost and most of the media felt that it was their duty to go after Trump with all they had, right? Even if that meant lying, even if that meant insulting him, probably in ways even much, much more aggressive than what he did during the campaign.
Well, he it seems to me that he can't go back and change what he did, but he can repent. He can change his mind, and people would readily understood if he said, okay, I was lobbying for this health bill, and yeah, I wanted to get rid of the Obamacare because they spent 7 years on it. But the fact is, I did realize that it was estimated that 32 million people would lose their insurance. And I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to pretend that I'm going to help people with health care. I want to really help them, as an example. And the base he has, which might be programmed to say, well, no, we don't want any socialist interference in our health care, even though every other developed country of any stature has that. He would have to surrender that. He'd have to actually turn against their prejudices against the single-payer system.
Yeah, the problem is that the way the government is set up, it's practically impossible for the president to be able to do that. Because, like, the current situation for the president is very difficult.
He can't do it alone, but he could, because probably the majority of people in this country, or very close to a majority, want it. They're appearing in town halls and screaming at their Republican representatives. The Bernie Sanders has truly probably the majority of people still potentially behind him if he runs for election, even though maybe the Democratic National Committee is not controlled by his group. But it seems like there's a possibility that he could get tremendous approbation if he would take that on. But even if he didn't take it on, we're really talking about an attitude of giving people what they really need instead of giving them something that's basically a lie. Like taking $80 billion out of Medicaid and leaving it to the states, which don't have necessarily enough money, and giving it to the rich people. Now, his base probably thinks if he gives it to rich people, they'll get more jobs. But that's a real big question. And the point is you can't, if people are going to be dying and being sick all the time because they don't have health care or have an accident, they can't take care of themselves, and you're basically burdening these hospitals with emergency room care. What is the reality there? You're not really serving the people of the United States. You're serving the donors of the Republican or the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and sadly, that's the way that the system is set up. That's the way it works.
But the system nearly didn't work last time. If it weren't for the fact that, unlike the Russians, the Democrats did something, the Democratic National Committee did something that basically cost the election from somebody who had a certain amount of integrity and dynamism when it came to serving the people.
Yeah, nobody seems to want to talk about that. Nobody wants to talk about that. Like, all the coverage in the media, it's about Russian scandal. Putin stooge, right?
Well, that's I know you know this, but that's the mainstream media. People like Democracy Now! Or the Young Turks. These are people who definitely would be for, and many other people would be for a single-payer system and for Bernie Sanders. There is a lot of them who would be, but they're a lot more fragmented than even the sort of the right-wing side of it. So that's a problem. You have a lot of alternative media that's there, But you have a lot of alternative media on the other side that is very, very Trump-oriented and very much programmed in certain ways like the Republicans are, you see.
Yeah, and they keep people distracted, what I would call non-issues, and at the same time, they're passing laws that they're chipping away little by little your rights, your liberties, your entitlements, everything. You're going to end up with nothing.
Well, that's what as soon as I started to see the people coming into his cabinet and also the Goldman Sachs contributors, I began to see that he was really following that trickle-down Republican theory. He was really trying to get people to work here. I believe he is. And, he's getting rid of or trying to modify some of these free trade agreements so you can actually get jobs here. But he doesn't really care about things like minimum wage, pensions, unions, things like that. I think he regards those things as obstacles to real growth. And, of course, he wants to get rid of all kinds of regulations, and some of them are really destructive to the environment and destructive to people, smaller people financially.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I do think that we need some reforms, and I think that you and I, we're not fans of excessive regulation.
That's right. I mean, I think that there's a lot of red tape and bullshit that's involved in this stuff, and some of it has actually sort of a monetary reward for certain individuals and certain groups. But that's not what I think. There's a lot of waste in government. Let's put it that way. And some of this is controlled by regulations that have no business being there. So I look forward to a president who would really go through those regulations carefully, but not with the design of protecting business and taking away the protection of things like the Dakota pipeline and injuring so many hundreds and hundreds of indigenous people and other people in that area. I remember him saying, "Well, I'm going to close my eyes and I'm going to sign this agreement and get this thing going." And at the same, and nobody's complaining, which is not true. A lot of people were still complaining. The same problem was there as before. So
you talked about the Dakota pipeline, and I digress. But I'm thinking about it. Wouldn't it be better if they built actually an above the ground pipeline so everyone could see it if it was leaking?
Well, I don't know about that, but I do know that these people who are some of the several groups that are involved in this process, and in the tribes that were mostly associated with it, they formed a solar energy type of company. They're trying to develop solar for the indigenous peoples, not just for themselves. And so these indigenous people that are, and there were many of them. I mean, many nations came to protest. They are very conscious of the dangers of this type of energy. And actually, they had tests of the pipeline, and I think right now the pipeline is held up again. I'm not sure by the courts, but they found that it was leaking. It was leaking.
Yeah, many others. It's like there's a pattern of failures, repeated failures in similar pipelines, because it's not the only one. It's the only one in that particular area, but
with indigenous people, right?
Pipelines, and there's a history of repeated failures in monitoring, and so leakage is a possible reality that you're facing, and the possible contamination of probably thousands or millions of gallons of water, right?
Yeah, and that's what's happened. I don't know the history very well. I've heard of one group in Texas. I heard some examples of how everybody in that area is sick. And a lot of times, it's like with fracking, which is also possibly producing similar dangers to the water table, and as well as earthquakes. And people aren't, looking at it, and people like Trump completely dismiss it. And the thing about it is, and if you want to serve the people, you've got to kind of look at science in a certain way. You've got to try and find out the truth, not being biased just automatically for people to make money. And what he's doing is he's stripping a lot of our environmental protections. Do I think that some of them should be stripped? Yeah, probably. Probably there's a lot of crap there that should be taken out of maybe the EPA. but there's other stuff that should be put in. And when we get to pollution, we'd have to talk about the FDA. And there's what would you say there? There's an endless amount of things that need to be changed there.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's extremely important to understand that there's bad regulations and there's good regulations. And we're for good regulations. It's not all regulations are bad. And yes, there's a lot of excessive bad regulations, passed by every state legislature and Congress. And yes, it's excessive, burdensome, right?
Yeah, burdensome. Hey, listen, Rod, we're going to have to take a break now for just a minute, and we'll be right back.
Great.
In Ken Eads' book, The Involuntary Spy, Seth Rogen, a scientist, after having discovered a major deception created by a multi-billion-dollar worldwide agribusiness giant that he works for, is driven by his conscience to release the information to the public at the peril of his reputation, career, and life itself. To do this, he must take refuge in Moscow. Here is an excerpt.
Chapter 4. Yuri helped Seth settle into the safe house in Moscow. Tomorrow night, he would take the 9-hour flight to the Far East. From the apartment, he could see the colorful and distinctive towers of St. Basil's Cathedral from his window, and the glittering gold onion domes of the Church of Annunciation in the Kremlin. This was the Kremlin he had seen so many times on television. Back then, during the Cold War, it had represented the seat of the Empire of Evil. Now, it was oddly beautiful. The American press was already doing damage control on Seth's report to Russia Today. The president called it propaganda and said that the United States was against the manufacture of biological weapons. Spokesman from the company said that Seth's report to RT should be disregarded as the words of a traitor and a thief. Because of his fleeing the country, Seth's story was discredited in every mainstream media report. Okay, your name now is George Amers, said Yuri, smiling, holding out documents. Here is new passport. I'm Canadian? Yes. Does that mean I have to say A all the time? Seth, Russians don't care what you say. But don't talk to people. Don't talk to people. And don't go anywhere. Just to work and back home. Sounds boring. Isn't that what you guys do in America anyway? Well, yeah. Okay. Don't make friends. If you want a girl, we get you girl. That sucks. Look, it's only for 6 months. Then you can do what you want. If you see anything suspicious, call me. 6 months, eh? Yes, 6 months. Oh, and shave mustache and color hair. What? You prefer shave head and color mustache? No, that's okay. I'll take the hair color. And we fix nose. What's wrong with my nose? Nose too big. It's not. We fix anyway. Okay, let me see if I've got it. Don't go anywhere. Don't make friends. Sleep with prostitutes that you send to me and wear a disguise. Yes, you are smart. Don't forget to use lenses I gave you for eyes. And, what? Lose some weight. Seth worked on his disguise with the materials Yuri had left in the safe house. He said a fond farewell to the mustache that had been with him since high school, and picked a dark brown color to mask his light brown hair. With the contacts in, his eyes changed from green to brown. He didn't even recognize himself. The surface disguise was the easy part. Being George Amers would be the true disguise to master.
You're saying that there are a lot of excessive regulations that are burdensome and not necessary. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the thing about it is that that's excessive regulations. There's a lot of excessive expenditures by government. There's a lot of things that need to be cleaned up and gotten rid of. A lot of projects and sort of, things that are basically satisfying certain Congress people or senators for their districts that don't need to be in the federal budget. It needs the whole thing has to be looked at. I mean, there's a lot of laws that are created that are so excessively written that nobody reads them, and that's a tremendous problem. I remember Rand Paul really getting heated about that important problem because they're giving people bills to sign, and the only people who read them are parts of the staff. And some of them are given that even the staff can't read them in time, which is ridiculous.
they're written by special interests.
By special interests that also know that if they're very long, this will help them get passed without proper scrutiny. And you have all this stuff. And what I'm saying, let's get back to the real basics. And this is my theory. When you are trying to become aware of the divine presence, of what another way of putting it would be source consciousness, you're trying to get into a place that links you to God, if you like, called by various names, one of which I like is the Shekinah, which is a Hebrew word. Another one, talking about Western religions, is the kingdom of God. Most people don't understand that, I would say in the world, don't understand that some of these things that Jesus and other people were talking about, it's a different state of consciousness. It's a state of being aligned with and experiencing a sort of infinite type of power that you're connected to, that just your very essence of your being is connected to, and you're conscious of it. And when you are, there's guidance, there's help, there's a clarification of your real mission, which is different than that part of you, the self, which we call the ego, which is separated from that, theoretically, it's separated from that presence. It's funny because the word ego in Latin means I. So we're really saying that most people's sense of I is separated from the divine presence. But when you experience the divine presence, this gives you a whole new way of reacting to the world. And a lot of times, people who are really down and out and alcoholic or addicted to drugs, and they will undergo a certain type of conversion by virtue of the spontaneous awakening of their true nature, because they've kind of bottomed out. Now, you see, that's one reason I think there's hope for Donald Trump, because he's bottoming out right now.
Oh, no, I agree. And I agree with you. And I do believe that transformation is possible.
And don't you agree, judging from your own experience, and you might discuss that a little bit, that you can actually change a lot of your sort of ethical and spiritual views of what's going on when you have that experience?
Oh, certainly you can. Certainly you can do it. And I do believe that Trump would be no exception. And I do believe that it's possible for the president to experience transformation that would have a direct effect on his presidency.
And you know what, this thing about, I think of the story of Bill W., who started Alcoholics Anonymous. And he had an experience like this. And in a certain sense, he tried to create a program where that was possible. He created sort of 12 different, rules. And these procedures or protocols move people closer to having that, potentially that experience. Now, not all of these people probably do. Some of them are nurtured by what they experience, and they do get off of, they stop being addicted. They change their mindset. But his was more than just changing a mindset. It was experiencing a different form of consciousness. And you cannot make that happen yourself. There has to be a participation from another level beyond you. But it is possible that it's facilitated if you want it. You say, God, I'm just so sick of, I have all these people attacking me, from the Republican Party, people from the so-called liberal side. I've got minorities that hate me. I've got people who want certain rights as workers who are suspicious of me. I want to serve the people, God. Could you just show me how to do it? Could you just change things for me so I could become more connected to you? Because if that happened, we'd have a real president. And maybe he's the best chance we have, because a lot of these people, they're really in the swamp. They really kind of believe in swamphood.
Yeah, well, the swamp is politics, and politics is the swamp.
Okay, so we're back. We're talking about the swamp that Trump was supposed to drain, and he hasn't drained it. He's gotten some employment activity, some stock market activity, which I'm not sure is really indicative of anything permanent because of the possibility of a tremendous bubble. But he has done some things, got rid of the free trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific partnership. That seemed to me a good thing. But really, the problem is he's not serving everybody. He's not serving the people. And if you have a really good agenda and it's really serving the people, you can convince people. Like, I think FDR did a little bit of that. Don't you, Rod?
I think he did. He did. He had a lot of detractors back in the day. A lot of people didn't like him. Remember, they even planned a coup?
Yeah, well, yes, I remember that. But that was a relative small minority of people. But there are a lot more people who didn't like him who weren't going to overthrow him.
Yeah, a lot of people did not agree with the New Deal policies. They did not agree with that type of role of government in the economy.
But the people who worked for some of these organizations that were sort of socialist, it really saved their lives. And there were many artists and people in theater and in the arts, in the fine arts, who participate in these things. And there were many people whose lives were basically saved because they couldn't get a job and they could work for the government. But it probably wasn't the government, these efforts that finally saved them. It was probably World War II. But nonetheless, I think Roosevelt did a good job in convincing a lot of people and the legislature to help him out. And so these programs actually came in, and I do think they helped a lot of individuals. And I'm saying that if Trump were to change and really showed a repentant spirit, I think he has the intelligence to be able to do some great things, great work, important work. He could actually bring back American democracy, but then he'd have to stand for it and get rid of. The swamp doesn't just contain people who are basically exploiting things for money. It contains people who are absolutely ripping our Constitution and the Declaration and its intentions to pieces. And scattering those pieces all throughout the country so that nobody is safe from government scrutiny or from very stringent ways of controlling people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's easier said than done. The nature of the beast is corrupt.
It's gigantic, but a transformed person can easily get rid of and discard a lot of that junk inside of them that distort their perspective and keep them from loving their neighbor and serving God.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do believe that it's possible, but it is a tall order. You got to start.
It's a tall order, and I mean, on a realistic point of view, the chances of Trump hearing this program are practically zero.
You never know; it could be retweeted.
Yeah, it might be, but the thing is, no one is going to be really convinced of something like this about transforming themselves just intellectually. In this case, they would have to hit bottom. They would have to realize, oh my God, I'm in this position of the greatest possible power in the world, and what am I really doing with it? Remember, Robert Kennedy, the environmentalist, that he asked to help with his autism project?
Yeah, the vaccine panel, right? Yeah,
and someone asked him, well, what do you think of what Trump's going to do? And this is what he said. He can do anything. He can do anything he wants. He could do anything. He doesn't have to be a slave of the power that be if he doesn't want to be. And he could do things, I mean, like, for instance, the emolument claims. He could get a blind trust or do something that was real and get himself out of that. Certainly, a lot about the Russiagate is probably not true because of some of the recent findings. I'm not sure if this will ever make it to mainstream media or to the independent counsel or anything, but there's a good chance that a lot of this is just fake intelligence or something like it, maybe a mistake, but I don't know, but it's pretty damn serious for him. But he still could get around it. If he was completely honest and completely changed, he would be able to magnetize a tremendous following, I think, of the American people. Because we like repentant sinners.
I think so. But I do see that there's a lot of people that really hate Trump, especially on the Democratic side.
Yes.
People on the media. I don't think that they will ever let that go. I can see hate in their eyes.
Well, I mean, that may be true, but you know what? As I say, repentant sinner. If he was suddenly to take positions that Sanders was taking and positions that were unique to his really great understanding of business in a certain way, but he had the right intention, I think he would magnetize a lot of people who hate him. Because, as I say, Rod, people like to see repentance. If they actually see someone in action who changes their behavior, I think they would. I mean, I think he's a great material for God to act on. I wish God would hurry up. He could act on Kim, too. That would help.
Oh, certainly. That would help the world.
Yeah, but there's only so much that we can do. I mean, this program is kind of different than most of the radio shows I've heard, because many of them are biased in one direction to the other. They'll take Trump down, and they'll still be kind of establishment Democrats, and they'll never even talk about the Clinton Foundation or Benghazi and other problems that she's had, and there are certainly an immense number of problems. Or they're for Trump, and they just take apart very effectively the Clinton establishment and Bernie Sanders. And remember when he talked about Bernie Sanders in the campaign, he called him a commie maniac. And that was just one of many things that he said that later on he sort of changed his mind about and wasn't so sarcastic. But he would have to change those things. He would have to reverse the way he'd have to do what you do in Alcoholics Anonymous, go around and say you're sorry. There'd be a lot of apologies he'd have to make to people, and he'd have to apologize to the American people by bringing them into the situation where their safety and their liberty is challenged, and also their prosperity, which was held up as such a gigantic lamp, because you can't extinguish the lamp of freedom and enjoy the lamp of prosperity. And prosperity under those circumstances will probably not exist anyway.
Yes, there needs to be a lot of healing and a lot of apologizing, a lot of healing, and many groups need to come together in order for those changes to take place, And but it's going to be a little bit difficult, I do believe, but I think it's possible.
It's possible. I would hate to look at the statistical chances we have, but let's conclude this exchange that we've been having, which I think has been wonderful, and I thank you for it. Let's pray about Trump perfected. So I'm going to start, and then maybe if you'd like to add something, I would appreciate it. Is that possible?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to pray that this man, who is in his 70s, who has a gigantic amount of business experience and interaction throughout the world, steps into a place in himself where he can gain his guidance, not from his ego and his desire for power and praise from various people or groups, but that he can get a direct line, a direct connection with the Holy Spirit, which we call the divine presence, which we call source consciousness, whatever you want to call it. It exists apart from any prescribed type of belief or group. It is truly a place of great possibilities. And I would like him to be able to have those possibilities. Possibilities for having maybe the greatest presidency that we've ever had, become one of the greatest leaders of anyone on this planet. I believe it's possible. And I pray to God that God will help him. But I also pray that he will notice and understand the limitations of being trapped in a mind that's not connected with that divine presence.
Amen. I pray for the same thing, Johnny. I think you covered it beautifully.
Thank you. Well, we'll see you all again, and let's all remember to pray for our leadership, and not just for American leadership, but the leadership in the world that we need to get along. Thank you very much.